So it's interesting because it's the headlines have talked about no hierarchy, and that's actually not true. There still is a hierarchy. The difference is, in a typical organization, it's a hierarchy of people, and under Holacracy, it's a hierarchy of purpose. And so there's a purpose for the company, and that's called the general company circle. And then within the circle, there's roles and multiple sub-circles, and then it kind of cascades down to that. And the other interesting thing is, now imagine this hierarchy of multiple circles, and within each circle there are roles. You, for example, can fill roles in maybe 7 different circles that each has its own separate purpose. And so there still is a hierarchy, but it might be, you might be lead link of, if you and I were in the same circle, you might be lead link of that circle, and in another circle, I might be lead link. And so it allows employees to really be involved in different areas of the company versus just being pigeonholed into their one specific job function. And so the ultimate goal is for employees to really find that intersection between what they're passionate about, what they're good at, and what's going to move the company forward. So
that's pretty fascinating. This lead link concept, what is the lead link? What's the definition of that? How do we think about that?
So it's basically a manager in a typical company has, wrapped up in the title of manager are a lot of different responsibilities, including basically setting strategy, resource allocation, role assignment, and hiring, firing, and so on. And lead link is a very specific subset of that, which is basically role assignment. So within your circle, you can actually tap the entire company of, in our case, 1,500, 1,600 employees, and decide who you want to offer those roles to, but you actually don't have the power to hire or fire any employee. It's basically, you can add them to a role or remove them from a role. And so it's very, and it may just turn out that they're not passionate about that role, or they're not a good fit for that role, and then that employee is kind of a free agent, and there's 500 circles to go explore to find the best fit.
Let's talk about you being CEO of Zappos. What does that mean now? Are you actually running the company? And then you're going to explain Teal to us in a non-complicated way, which would be great. Teal is the way they're running the company now, correct?
Teal is more, I guess, the philosophy or the intention behind it, but specifically the system we're using today is a system called Holacracy.
Holacracy, right.
And it'll take a long time to get into all the specifics, but I think the simplest way to describe it is we're moving from a system, which is how most corporations are designed, which is about command and control,
so
and try to plan and try to predict and plan, to a system that's more self-organized, self-managed, and it's more about sensing and responding on an ongoing basis. And so I think the clearest example is if you look at all the different organizations that have happened, or whether it's in nature or in amongst humans, cities are actually the best example, where not only have they stood the test of time, but they actually scale. So every time the size of a city doubles, innovation or productivity per resident actually increases by 15%. But the opposite generally happens with companies. As they get bigger, they get more bureaucratic, innovation per employee generally goes down. And so part of it is, how do you scale innovation in an organization? And then the other part of it is really about resilience and longevity. So if you look at, I think the Fortune 500 list came out first in 1955 or something, and 88% of the companies that were there in 1955 on that list are no longer on that list. So the default future for companies as currently organized is death, and that's something
right.
that
1955. Although
right.
I was not around then either. It was a long time ago. Mm-hmm. It was 70 whatever. I don't do math. But you're talking about, you had a very successful company You had a company that had, and I had been on your tour, you had a very friendly company, you had one that did a lot of various things that were quirky, but not a wholesale change of the system. It was a basic company, and you were enormously successful doing this, and so successful you sold your company to Amazon. Why did you want to change it, and then what changed for you as a CEO? Because as I understand in reading Holacracy and Teal, there are no managers, there are no leaders, they're semi-leaders, but it's a very different system. So you had enormous success using this other system, and then
at a certain scale.
At a certain,
and
okay.
so I think one of the things that I felt, and probably every employee, not just at Zappos, but in general, as companies get bigger, they get more bureaucratic, and there's more people to try to convince of something. And so stuff just generally moves slower, and it's not really any one individual's fault. It's just a function of the way it's structured hierarchically and how the typical structure works. And so where you don't get that is, again, in cities, and not only that, but so one of my favorite examples, if you think of Manhattan, there's something like 3 days of food supply for all of Manhattan, but there's no central food planner, and people and businesses just selfishly consume food, and then that creates opportunities for food suppliers, and the whole system just works. And Manhattan never runs out of food, and a bridge could go out, there could be a natural disaster. It's resilient, it responds and adapts very quickly, and that's really what we're trying to move towards for Zappos. And so my motivation is I want something that outlasts me and a company that is still there 500 years from now, and that's something that you don't get under the current structure.
So that begs the question, why sell your company at all? What was the impetus to doing this? And what does Amazon think of this? Because Amazon is not run as a holacracy. I think even if you took the best case scenario of the New York Times article, you wrote a book called Happiness. Wait. No, I know what it is. Anyway, you were, I'm sorry? What? Delivering Happiness. That story sort of was delivering misery, it seemed like. How do they think of what you're doing? Are you allowed to do what you want, or do you have to perform? And if you're not performing, they're going to come in and invade, or what?
Yeah, so Amazon actually tried acquiring us several years before the
Many
actual
people
acquisition.
did, not just Amazon.
And at the time, they wanted to acquire us and integrate us and so on. And so we actually said no right away. And then they came back a few years later and said, okay, we told them that the only way we would even consider the scenario is if we could operate independently, if we can have our own separate culture, and basically we think of them as our equivalent of a board of directors. Mm-hmm. And from our point of view, back in 2009, which is when the acquisition happened, it was as if we swapped out our previous board of directors with a new one that happened to be composed of Amazon folks. And mm-hmm. so happy to report, 6-7 years later, they've remained true to their word. And I don't know if this is true for all their subsidiaries, but mm-hmm. this was actually, we have a written document that basically outlines exactly what I just said. And surprisingly, we've actually gotten more freedom from them, because with our previous board of directors, which consists of VCs and so on, it was much more financially driven in terms of the short term, whereas Amazon understands the value of customers in the long term, and really they're long-term thinkers. And I totally agree, their culture is very different from ours. And if I had to guess, probably most Zappos employees wouldn't do well in an Amazon environment, and vice versa. But they've basically left us alone.
Is there any circumstance where they would come in? If for example, your growth hasn't been the same as it was in the beginning, as small companies do tend to be fast growth companies. Is there any impetus for them coming in to change that? I mean, it's happened at other companies.
I think it's no different from, forget Amazon, if using our previous board of directors, if we weren't performing to the financial metrics that we committed to, then there would be a conversation.
So why do this? Do you feel like your company was going sideways? Because you had enormous success what you were doing in the first place, which was sort of you know, it was a much more benign way of doing it. This has a lot of rules and strictures. It was more, again, I would say quirky and sort of typical of many, many internet companies, but not gone this far. And many people have, like, wonder about it.
You're talking about Amazon?
No, about you, not just Amazon, but others. Why do this change in your
You're
culture?
talking about holacracy and
yes.
the self. I think it's really just about trying to get ahead of it, and even myself, I feel like as we've gotten bigger, and in Vegas we have about 1,600 employees right now, we're just getting more bureaucratic, and if you look at the innovation per employee metric, then that's slowed down. And so it was really, I think it wasn't really so much a focus on holacracy, which just happens to be the platform that we're using now, but really just doing research and looking at what results in longevity, what results in resilience. And with the previous speakers, like the first speaker talked about, how do we continue to have the innovation? And it's basically by having this other group of people that he doesn't mess with. And so how do we actually, in his example, it's about him being the benevolent CEO that allows that to happen. Whereas I don't want it to be dependent on my benevolence or the next CEO's benevolence. It needs to be built into the structure. Mm-hmm. And so if you look at a city, yes, different mayors can do good or possible harm to a city, but it's not going to cause the city to collapse. And cities have stood the test of time. They stand the test of innovation and scaling and so on. And so that's
how
really
should you, so what is your role? What do you do if there's no, are you the CEO? You have your title still, but in your system, they are not necessarily called, there's not, that there are groups and circles and various things. What do you do all day? Are you completely useless now?
It's the only way I get interviewed at conferences like this, and so it's interesting because it is useful externally, but internally there's a very specific constitution, just like the U.S. has a constitution that spells out the specific authority that I do have and don't have, and so in the old world, I could have technically just walked up to any employee and said, "You're fired because I don't like you," and whether I did it or not it doesn't mean I couldn't have. Whereas today, like, I definitely cannot, even if I wanted to. And so in terms of my specific, what you're referring to as the CEO role, my authority is actually very limited. And that being said, I actually fill a number of roles. It's probably 10 different roles within the entire organization.
So what do you do all day? What do you do? You don't get to fire people. You don't get to tell people what to do. What do you do? What do you see as your role in this new system? And then I want to, a lot of employees it didn't work for. This hasn't worked, and a number left because they couldn't deal with the system.
So two very different questions. I'll answer the first one. And so it changes, but not just for me, but for all employees. And I would say probably every employee fills a number of different roles within the organization, and they can resign from roles and take on other roles and so on. And so
these are moving from circle to circle.
Yes, and I'm trying to stay away from the holacracy speak, but I think the media has kind of portrayed it as there's just total chaos. There actually is still a hierarchy.
No, I think they portray it as a crazy cult, but go ahead.
A crazy cult in total chaos is...
Well, that's sort of the definition of a crazy cult, but go ahead.
And so it's actually, instead of a hierarchy of people, it's a hierarchy of purpose statements, and then employees and there's different roles, and then employees can actually fill multiple roles. So it's kind of one layer of abstraction removed. And so in the old world, if someone is higher up in this hierarchy,
like the director of HR,
then that automatically implies they have more power than everyone under them. Whereas in the new world, you might fill one role up here and one role up here and one role up here, and there's even multiple cases where in one circle you may actually have more authority over someone else here filling a role, but your roles may be completely flipped in a completely different equivalent of a department over here. And so for me, it's really just about filling whatever need the company has. And it's not just me, though, but every employee can constantly move around to really continually fill whatever the company needs. And then the second question was about,
some employees don't like it.
Right. And so the difference is this whole move to, and the bigger picture thing is it's about self-management and self-organization, which essentially means we're trying to turn every, it's called a circle or a team, whatever you want to call it, and into its own startup, and every employee into almost like a mini entrepreneur, which is not for everyone. And I would say on average, it's in the world, forget our specific implementation, my guess is it's probably 50-50. Some people just want to know and be told what steps 1 through 10 are, and if they execute on those steps 1 through 10, then they know they've done a good job. And that works really well in an old world environment where the manager is the one telling them, here's exactly what you need to do and how to do it. And so what we found, and there was actually a research study that was done, I think a year or two ago, where they looked at what separated the great entrepreneurs from just typical managers or people that were just reporting to managers. And they found that great entrepreneurs actually over-indexed for 3 characteristics. One was being comfortable with ambiguity. Second was having a strong sense of curiosity. And then a distant third, but still over-indexing, was emotional intelligence. And so those are characteristics that we're now...
Emotional intelligence.
Right.
Which isn't, you don't see a lot among tech CEOs.
Oh,
come on.
It depends. Well, it's a distant third, so the first 2 are most important.
Yeah.
But it's still over-indexed compared
Right.
to the general population in terms of what makes for,
Right. Okay.
For a great entrepreneur. And so those are characteristics that are kind of baked into our core values already if you combine them in different ways, but now that we're specifically looking for. Because if people really need to know what steps 1 through 10 are, they're not going to thrive in this environment. And so there was another study where they looked at, I think they compared entrepreneurs with MBA students or graduates, and they asked them to go make a dish. And what MBA students would tend to do is they'd go decide what they wanted, go Google it, look up the ingredients, go buy those ingredients, and then make that, and then deliver exactly what they were looking for. Whereas what entrepreneurs would do was they'd look around open the fridge, look in the cupboard, and then look at what ingredients there are, and then cobble together something that had never been made before, and that's what they made. And so that's the type of employee we're looking for.
So you do get a lot of attention in the media for this. Do you mind it? Because it does come, it can come, it's disturbing to a lot of people, I think, what you're doing. And especially when you were so successful doing it the other way. Do you think this is the only way to success for Zappos going forward?
So the media tends to focus on the holacracy aspect of it, whereas I'm really focused on the self-organization and self-management part of it. And so I absolutely believe self-organization and self-management is the future. It's the only thing that has stood the test of time, not just in humans, but in nature as well. And if you look at use a rainforest as an example, there's no CEO of the rainforest. And
God, but go ahead.
Well, so I think of it as like, let's use a greenhouse analogy.
All right.
All right. So
Sorry.
maybe a typical, okay, complete aside.
God is totally top down, by the way.
Since you threw in God, I'm going to tell you one of my favorite jokes, which is, did you hear about the dyslexic, agnostic insomniac? He stayed up all night wondering if there really was a dog. So, anyways.
That's a good joke. I have a dirty iPhone joke, but I'll tell it to you later.
Okay, so
I will later.
If you think of a greenhouse and maybe a typical CEO is, say, the strongest, tallest plant that all the employee plants one day strive to be, that might be a typical CEO or corporate environment, whereas what I'm passionate about is really, and how I think of my role is, how do I architect the greenhouse so that it creates the right conditions for all the plants to thrive, and all the potential that's already within them can. It's not really.
So you think this is the only way to stay innovative at Zappos and make it a better business than it's ever been?
Not just innovative, but long-lasting, resilient. But yes, innovative.
It's interesting because right now the political climate is very tough. The people that are being, I mean, Donald Trump is not that kind. I can't imagine him doing holacracy or being on the bottom of anything.
At the same time, I don't know how much whoever was president 20 years ago actually, I don't know if any president, because of the way our Constitution and system is designed, will actually cause permanent harm, say 100 years from now, right? And so that's what I'm trying to focus on at Zappos, is how do you make it so that it doesn't matter who the CEO or president or whatever is, that 100 years from now it'll still be resilient, it'll still stand the test of time, it'll still be innovative.
Well, they do have the nuclear bomb at their disposal, so there is a problem there. But no, let's hope not. Let's hope not. Let's talk about the business itself then. So you're trying hard to keep innovation going, keeping the company for the long term. It's been selling all kinds of products, which is more mundane than what you're talking about in a lot of ways. Like you're selling shoes, you're selling other objects. How is that business now online, and how has that changed? Because you all sort of pioneered something that got a lot of attention. It did really well. Where is it going now? Where is the actual commerce business, having created a successful one?
So internally, we actually use the word WOW a lot. It's actually one of our
Which one?
WOW.
Wow. Okay.
WOW. So one of our core values is to deliver WOW through service. And what I like about that being one of our core values is that it's environmental and competition dependent. And so when Zappos first started, this idea of free returns was a big wow.
Right. Everybody else is copying.
But now we're not the only ones that do it. And then when we encourage customers to call our 1-800 number, that was a big wow. And then when customers actually call us, then that becomes a big wow. And what's interesting, as this is a tech-ish conference, is as everyone's moving more and more towards how do we become more high-tech, we're actually moving more and more towards how do we become more human, more humanizing. And so when customers call us, we have their undivided attention for 5 to 10 minutes. And what we found is if we get that interaction right, we actually have that customer for life, and their lifetime value goes up by between 4 and 6 times. And they don't even actually have to place an order, and it doesn't even have to be their first order. And so we're actually trying to figure out how do we get our customers to contact us in a more low-tech way, and we view our call center not as an expense to minimize, but really as a branding investment that we're trying to get more of.
So what would be that next wow? They have borrowed a lot of your things and used them, and they're sort of table stakes now. What in online commerce right now, what has to happen?
Well, I guess so there's people that are focused on how do you increase conversion and do all that standard e-commerce stuff, whereas what I'm personally thinking about is how do we expand beyond just e-commerce? And probably the clearest example is Virgin, where they started out with music and now they're in hundreds of businesses, and it's all built on their brand. And for us, it's kind of the analogous thing. How do we build off of the Zappos brand, off the Zappos culture, and off of just our customers' emotional feelings towards us? And then how do we actually build off of stuff that we're already building for ourselves internally? And I think, I don't know all the details, but the story of Slack is a great example where I think they were into trying to do games or something.
No, he was making a game. It was
Right.
a huge failure. He ran out of money, and he had nothing but the system that they used internally to talk to each other.
Right. And then
so
now
Ben
that's its
Hur-
own great business. And so historically, we've kind of dabbled in that. We've had other companies come and we have this, actually we have a bunch of people right now that are from all over the world where they come for a 3-day equivalent of boot camp to learn about core values, culture, customer service, and talk to the different heads of departments. So that's its own little side business for now. But we always get requests for what are the internal tools that you use for helping build culture. So anything
So
from...
that's not selling things. So you imagine your business, your biggest business, not to be selling things at some point?
Well, selling software as a service, potentially. And so it could be anything from how we have complete transparency and clear accountabilities in org chart software, to how we get employees to get to know each other when they log in, pop up a random face and quiz employees on who that is, and then have them learn each other, to how do we do peer-to-peer cultural reviews that are based on core
It's all
values.
about your management. It's about how you manage the company. You're selling how you manage the company.
It's, I guess it depends on what the companies are individually interested in. So we happen to care about culture and core values, but they care about some other thing or a KPI, then they could just
My point
insert
being, it's not
different.
let's sell more shoes, or sell more shoes in Sri Lanka, or something like that.
We want to do both. And
So
not-
in that zone, Amazon just announced it's selling a lot of its own apparel and other things. Do you feel that's competitive?
no, we actually think that it's going to be, I don't know what the word is, additive, multiplicative. And there's actually, because we obviously use their warehouses now that we're part of Amazon, and so we can help each other out.
So where do you imagine your role in what is Zappos in 5 years, or 10 years, or
I
500 apparently?
So for me, what's really exciting is really this whole, use the metaphor of the greenhouse or the city and so on. So if you ask, if I asked you what your vision was for what was going to be 3 blocks away from you 5 years from now, where you live, like that's kind of a hard question to answer. Or if there was a newborn and you said, what is your vision for this child 20 years from now, then I think there's certain values and maybe learning abilities and so on that you want to infuse into that. But at the same time, it's the shift that it's interesting. The prior 2 speakers were talking about is you have to let go a little bit of control and let whatever evolves evolve with under the right conditions and under the right environment. And what I'm interested in is how do you do that from a systematic process and culture and values perspective, versus me saying, I happen to be CEO today, so this is what I'm going to benevolently let evolve.
So one more question. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask what happened in Vegas here. You moved your company into the middle of old Las Vegas, really. You tried the holacracy experiment to try to create innovation in an area that needed development, that was downtrodden and had some issues. Hasn't worked as well as you had felt. What happened there, and where do you see it going?
So holacracy, so part of it is that we actually are still using holacracy in, for example, the real estate side of Downtown Project, which is what you're referring to. But I would, specifically holacracy, it's a platform. So the analogy I use is, imagine if someone handed you the latest iPhone and the latest iOS, but no apps on it. And you got it, you would just think, okay, this is not really a great phone, when really all it's missing is the apps. And so you have to figure out, not only do you have to use this iPhone, but you have to build the apps yourself. And so that's basically what we're doing at Zappos. Luckily, we're big enough with 1,600 employees where we can actually carve out the equivalent of an app developer for this platform. And so I think for companies that are starting right now, they're in the position where they still have to build the apps. And so what I'm excited about is once we've iterated and figured out a lot of stuff over the, I think, roughly 3 years that we've been doing this, then we can share what works and doesn't work.
What didn't work in downtown Vegas? You were trying to create an innovative city with all kinds of startups, many of which failed. What happened there from your perspective?
I think it's just the natural, like that's what it is to be an entrepreneur. Like some of the things, not every first venture is going to work, and whether it's a small business or a tech startup, and some are going to work. So we literally, I think, have invested in over 150 different companies, some of which are small businesses and some are tech companies. And what I think the media misses out on is what's actually happening on the ground. And so one of our first small businesses that we invested in is, I met her at a coffee shop. Her name's Natalie, and she was literally, she had worked for 10 years at one of the restaurants on the Strip, and had literally packed up her bags and was leaving town because she was sick of the casino lifestyle. And this was like, I don't know, 3 years ago. And we decided to invest in her when I learned that her dream was to open up her own breakfast place. And so she opened that up. We put all the capital in, and within 1 year and 3 months, not only did she pay back her original capital, but she started mentoring other first-time restaurant entrepreneurs, and now she's already opened up a second restaurant. Her first restaurant was a breakfast and lunch place that has been written up by all the food magazines and so on, and then her next one, her current one, is this Chinese food and Southern concept that's dinner and lunch. And
so that's a success, but a lot of hope was dashed by a lot of people. Again, I'm not trying to hone in on it. It's like you're talking about creating your company like your city, but then you were trying to create a city, and it's not quite as easy to just create.
Well, I think that's what's. I think we're basically trying to provide an extra level of safety. So let's go with the city environment. If you start a small business and it fails, as many small businesses will, then it's pretty hard to start another small business. And so there's no one that's going to provide you an ongoing salary. So at Zappos, we're actually trying to find that combination between how do you have the safety and comfort of having a salary, and at the same time get the benefits of being like an entrepreneur within an organization. So we're trying to
And in Vegas?
That's exactly what we're doing. Yeah,
in downtown Vegas. So where is that going next? Where do you investing more money in it? You're just going to wait and see what happens?
Yeah, we actually just had it's been a sequence. So we started out, because originally the area that we were focused on was not safe. Where Container Park is now,
Yeah.
I would have felt unsafe myself 3 years ago, and now we've had 3 million.
No, it's a lovely area.
3 million visitors, kids and family all the time. And literally just yesterday or the day before, we had a groundbreaking ceremony for an apartment complex. So
you consider it a success? What's happened there?
it's a work in progress.
It's a work in progress.
Like any startup, probably.
All right, last question. What's the thing that most people misconstrue about you?
I would say, because I'm generally introverted and shy, that most people, and this is feedback I hear from other people, that because I don't say a lot if they're around and I don't know them, that they think I don't like them when I'm just shy.
But sometimes you don't like them, right? No, I'm kidding. No, you like it. Get some drinks and ask Tony any question you want. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.